everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Today we are picking right back up on the 1850s plaid silk dress project. As you can see, I am wearing it right here, and in fact I am picking up literally seconds after I finished the last video where I showed you how I made this bodice so far. So this week, instead of continuing on with the bodice first, I want to start with the skirt, because if you remember from the last video, I was talking about how I really wanted to check how this tail right here of the bodice was laying once I have like all of the layers of the skirt all on, as opposed to just hoop skirt and petticoat. So yeah, that means that we're starting with the skirt. And honestly, like 1850 skirts, they're relatively easy. This one, even though it does have a second tier and also some additional decorations in the form of the band that you see right here, as well as all the bows down the front, it is still a pretty simple base, and that is because skirts in the 1850s were straight panels. They were not gored. We don't get gored skirts until the 1860s. So it's nice. That means that this is going to be honestly really quite simple. I just have to figure out how many panels of this fabric I want to use as my skirt. So just as a little starter, the hoop skirt that I am wearing right here under here, the largest hoop is 120 inches around. So it needs to be significantly more than that. I wrote down once, and I don't remember exactly where I heard this, that a 116-inch hoop should have a 200-inch skirt circumference. So since my hoop is only a tiny bit bigger than that, my skirt panels should only need to be a tiny bit bigger than 200 inches. 200 inches is a whole lot of fabric. Now, for this skirt in particular, I am only actually planning on doing like a partial top tier. So as you can see again in this fashion plate, we have the top tier and then we have the ruffle in the bottom. Now, if I had just like all of the fabric in the world, I could do one entire base level and then the skirt, like the gathered ruffle-y thing on top of that, so that by the time you're looking at the hem, there would actually be 2 layers there. I think that's excessive, and I don't think I need to do that at all. So my plan is just to do a partial layer and a partial layer that would then be ruffled. So that 200-inch skirt circumference, because I have a ruffle at the bottom, it doesn't quite compute. So I have to figure out like how many panels I want for the top and then how many panels I want for the bottom gathered into that top panel. And basically I'm just going to be sewing together these straight panels on the top, adding pockets, of course, because how can you have a skirt without pockets? And then putting it all on a waistband. Then I will figure out what I'm going to do for that band that goes over where the ruffle starts. I haven't figured that out yet because I think it's going to require a trip to Joann's just to see what they have. If they have like a really wide ribbon that corresponds super well, I may just use that. But if you remember from my last video, I mentioned how it is actually fringed. It's basically frayed. The long edges of the ribbon or band or whatever, they are frayed to give a little extra texture. And my initial thought was to use my purple silk velvet as all of the contrast solids for this because it matches perfectly. But first off, the idea of trying to fray the silk velvet sounds awful. And then secondly, that would mean also that all of the bows all the way down the front are also made out of the silk velvet, which also sounds fairly awful. Like it sounds like it'd be gorgeous once it's finished, but the idea of actually doing it sounds pretty awful. So I'm probably gonna go to Joann's and see what they have in the purple sphere, because otherwise I do have yellow, but I just don't like the idea of that yellow being so much. I like it being kind of a subtle color and having purple be the main color. So yeah, we'll figure that out after a trip to Joann's, but that's okay. That just gets applied on top. For now, let's go ahead and figure out the math of how many panels I need for this skirt. So I just measured my silk and it is 54.5 inches wide. That was on the fold. And that means that going by that original math, this 116 equals 200, I would need 4 panels, a little less than 4 panels probably, but just make it easy and say 4 panels to go around. However, because I have that ruffle, I think what I'm gonna do is sew together 3 panels, see what that looks like, and then see if I need to add a 4th panel. So I'm gonna start there. It's gonna be measured about halfway down the skirt, and I'm gonna just start making those panels. So I've just done the scale math on here to figure out how long I need to make this tier versus this tier. Unfortunately, I printed it out in full color, which was not my intention, but I do this and I blow it up as large as I can so that I can then measure. I actually drew in a little line where I think her waist is because her giant sleeves are blocking her waist, but I measured from that line down to just above the bottom of the ribbon, like right where my fingernail is here. I measured that, which equaled 3 exactly, and then I measured the full length from that line to the bottom, which was 4 7/8, 4.875, and then I did the scale. I need a 50-inch long skirt. It's really 50.5 inches in the back, but it's 50 inches in the front. And so this algebraic math to find X, meaning what is this on me, means that my top tier, including seam allowance, will need to be 31.75 inches long, and therefore the bottom tier, including a 2-inch hem and seam allowance, will be 22.25 inches long. And then I just have to figure out how many panels I need of each. So that said, the annoying thing about making this 31.75 inches long is that that is not a pattern repeat. 30.5 inches, no, 30.25 inches would be the pattern repeat on this fabric, which means I'm going to wind up wasting, what is that, like 1.5 inches of fabric each time, because basically my pattern starts on this little narrow line that I'm poking at from underneath right here. That's where my pattern starts. So that's going to be kind of annoying. I might see, actually, you know, I might double check and see if I can do, this is the same like top to bottom, you know, top versus bottom. So I might see if I can just find the middle, and that way I can better line things up, I think. Okay, that comment about finding the middle probably made very little sense. So this is what I'm talking about. So I had started the pattern repeat, as I mentioned before, at this line right here, but I realized if I actually at the top start it here in the center of a pattern repeat, then every 32 inches it switches to be like another center. And so instead of 31.75 inches, I'm going to make my top 32 inches, because then this can be the top. This next pin down here somewhere, there it is, can be the bottom of 2 panels, and then the other end can then be the top again. So if that makes sense, because this isn't directional, so I can make one go this way and one go this way. So now that I am getting some panels ripped, I can kind of squunch a panel all up together at my waist here and just hold it up to my waist, trying to see if this would be like 1/3 of my waist. And that way I can see if 3rd panels, as in 3 panels around, will be enough, or if I need to do 4 panels around for the top. To be honest, I haven't decided yet, but what you can't really see, I can't really get it on screen here, is that frankly, like my hoop skirt, it's kind of bell-ish shape like that. Like it goes, the last few hoops are not that different in size from each other at the bottom. And so really like the widest part is pretty much where that band is going to be at the bottom. Just so I can raise it up a little so you can see there. It's basically the widest part. And so I am thinking I very well maybe need 4 around, but I think I'm gonna mull on it a little bit and just stare at myself in the mirror and then decide that way. Okay, I've decided 3 panels is going to be totally fine for the top section. Not sure exactly how many I'll do for the bottom. It will either be 4.5 or 5 or like 5.5, somewhere in there. I'll have to play and experiment with that eventually. But yeah, 3 panels will be just fine. So I'm gonna have 1 panel that's gonna be centered on the front, like you see me holding this here. There will be pockets right here in these side seams, and then 1 other panel to here to the center back, and likewise on the other side, so that there will be a center back opening, and that way that center back opening can also hide just a little bit underneath the tail here. And yeah, that should be just perfect. So one of the things that I have been waffling about since I ripped all of the panels yesterday is whether or not to line them. And so I've done a bunch of research over the last bit since I last talked to you, and I was looking through like patterns of fashion, costume and detail, etc., trying to figure out if there was a general rhyme or reason on were silk skirts lined in this period. And although it is not a hard and fast rule, I did find some that were unlined. It seems like the majority of them were actually lined. And usually it says like with a lightweight stiff cotton. So to me, that means organdy. So luckily I have a lot of organdy here already. And unfortunately, the organdy is not the same width as my fabric. So what I've been doing here is I have been cutting out panels that are 32 inches long. It's in the same length as the upper portion of the skirt. And I've been cutting out these panels, and I have cut 4 of them at this point, and I'm going to join them together like side by side, you know, and then see like how many I basically need to make up each panel so that I can flatline each panel. Now, sometimes the skirts of this era were bag lined. I found at least 2 instances that said of bag lining the skirts. I've never heard of bag lining skirts before. I've never seen that before. The majority of them were flatlined. So I'm gonna go with flatlining despite the fact that bag lining would be easier, but it just seems weird to me. I do not know yet whether I am going to line the ruffle down at the bottom. I kind of feel like that might give it like too much body because it's a pretty stiff organdy. So I guess we will cross that bridge when we get to it. But for now, joining all these together and then flatlining them to these silk pieces that I've already cut out. So these skirt panels are now all assembled, complete with pockets in those seams, and then I've just left kind of a slit in the back because that is where the opening is going to be. So it's 8.5 inches long. That's how I always do my opening slits. And now it is time to go ahead and get this all pleated and gathered up to a waistband. So I was looking in Costume and Detail, which if you do not have Costume and Detail, I highly, highly recommend that book. It is definitely one of my most used books. In fact, if you are looking for book recommendations, I've actually done a video all about that, so I will link that down below in the description. In any case, I was looking in Costume and Detail, and there was one from the 1850s, I think 55 to 57, so a little earlier than this, that showed box pleating all around plus then gathers in the back area, and I kind of like the idea of that. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put this on the dress form over there and then just like play with it and see kind of what I like, what works best. But in general, there did tend to be a little bit more fullness in the very back, even in the 1850s when this was like a straight panel. There was still usually more fullness in the back of the skirt than there was the rest of the way around. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and play with now and then get this all attached to a waistband. And the upper portion of the skirt is now done. I'm really happy with how these box pleats turned out. Basically, I was trying to kind of match the repeat here. So really, you can see underneath like where this came. So this is like that. And then I just made them meet in the middle, and that way the purple is really the more dominant color up there too, which I really like. And then when we get over to the back here, it's a little dark, but we have all of the gathers. I just did this machine gathering on the machine and pulled that up as tightly as I could. So that's just taking up the back portion here. And then the rest are these box pleats. I think there's like 11 box pleats in all, I want to say, but it looks super cute. I'm glad I didn't try to do any more panels because I think the fullness is plenty. And I do think, like, since this is really quite stiff, that organdy I have is very papery, I don't think that's going to work for the ruffle. So I am not planning to line the ruffle. The ruffle will have enough of the fabric that I don't think it will need to be lined, and it will be at least 1.5 times the width that is here, maybe more, but I want to experiment with the 1.5 times and see what that looks like before I try to do like 1.75 or 2 times as much. So ruffle will be tomorrow. So a couple of updates for today. I went to Joann's just a little bit ago here, and I brought with me a swatch of the purple plaid, and I also brought this trim right here, which I honestly don't even remember where I got this. I want to say it was probably from the bargain basement. I don't know why I picked it up, but I did, and I've had it in my stash for ages and ages and ages. And it is this like fuzzy little fringy trim here. It's like fuzzy yarn, but it happens to be like a beautiful shade of purple that totally goes with this plaid fabric, and it's pre-fringed. So part of my idea in bringing the little bit of a swatch of this with me to Joann's was maybe I can find a ribbon or a fabric that would perfectly match this and I can use for those solid parts of the dress, like the bows and the band on the skirt and on the sleeves. So I brought it there thinking like, okay, it's gonna be a long shot to find something that goes with this and goes with the purple and, you know, can be made into those ribbons. And then sitting up on a very high shelf, not with the rest of the Casa collection, even though it is Casa collection, I found this. Okay, I feel like it, because of the shine, it is showing up almost shot on here. It's not. It's a perfect color match to this trim. I think when I get it a little farther away, you can see that. Yeah, it is a matte satin, which is like my favorite Casa fabric because it doesn't look really cheapy. I was able to use the coupon. And so yeah, that is my plan to do for those ribbon type areas, is probably to put some sort of hem on this, but honestly, I may not even have to do that because if I stitch this over the edge of it, I might just like serge the edges and then stitch this over it and call it good, because no one will see like behind that or underneath that or whatever. But yeah, it's a really, really lovely color match with all this. I think it'll make it very much more autumnal than using the like yellow, or they had a lighter purple, for example, too, using either of those. And yeah, it'll also give a cool texture because of this fuzzy softness, which I would be losing the cool texture by not using the velvet. So at least I'd be having this cool texture. And I have like a ton of this. I have no idea how much I have, but it probably tells. I hope this isn't what it says, because this says 55 yards. What am I ever going to do with 55 yards of this? I'm going to need approximately like 22 yards for this because it'll go either side of the ribbon trim, and there's about 11 yards of the ribbon trim. But yeah, 55 yards? Really? Really? In any case, I have also now started working on the lower tier of the skirt. All I've done so far is those 4 panels that I had ripped when I ripped the upper part of the skirt. I sewed them together end to end. Sometimes the seam lines up and sometimes it doesn't, because this fabric seems to like to be different. So like it matches up here and yet somehow it doesn't here. I don't get it. It's literally the selvage. So with the 4 panels here, I know that that is not going to be enough to get around the whole skirt. I know that I need at least 4.5, but I may need as many as 6. And so as not to like divide a half panel. Sorry, there's a chicken in my yard. I don't have chickens. My next door neighbors have chickens, but there is a chicken in my yard. I'll be right back. I think it somehow got over the fence and doesn't know how to get back. It lives over there. I hope you were prepared for this riveting content. Do you want to go home? Can I help you go home? How can I help you? Do you need assistance? Oh, see, its friend is right there on the other side of the fence. Do you need assistance? How did you get over here? How'd you get here? Chicken, do you even realize there's a cat right there? I have no idea how this chicken got into my yard. I have no idea how to get this chicken out of my yard. I'm sure this is all the content that you subscribed for, right? And if you're not subscribed, make sure that you are. Hit that subscribe button so that you can be notified when I release more chicken in my backyard videos. He won't get on my broom. She, I guess. chicken. There's a cat right there. Is the chicken actually following Dora? So unfortunately, I was far too in the moment of, you know, trying to catch the chicken to actually get it on film. But just to tell you how that all resolved, as I was coming home from going to the neighbor's house to tell them that their chicken was gone, they unfortunately were not home, so I left a message on their Ring doorbell. My neighbor right next door was just arriving home as I came in, and I asked him, hey, you ever caught a chicken before? And he said no, but wanted to take a look anyway. And Lion actually was the hero of the hour, because Lion chased the chicken into a corner of the yard. I guess I should have had Lion involved from the get-go. He chased it into the corner, but didn't like bite it or anything, but like held it there in the corner of the yard while this chicken was apparently trying to burrow itself under the fence. And my neighbor went up, grabbed the chicken, and then threw it over the other neighbor's fence. This is different neighbor. So yeah, chicken is back at home and back to sewing. I honestly do not remember where I left off when I was, you know, pre-chicken all of this, but I think what I was saying was I was going to be running gathering stitches on this, and I'm going to do a test section to see how densely I want this gathered. So I'm probably going to run some gathering stitches on the machine, like 2 panels together, and then just gather it up, kind of pin it to the skirt over here and see what it looks like. And if it looks good, that will be the ratio that I go with. Most likely I will then wind up needing to cut additional panels out from here and attach them to the end, and then attach it all together in a circle. By the way, I decided not to line this with the organdy because it just would have been way too stiff with this many gathers. However, I was talking to my friends when I was trying to make this decision, and they suggested that I could always put like an additional kind of lining flounce layer, maybe of the organdy or of something else underneath, like attached underneath, but that wouldn't be actually flat lined to this if it needed like a little bit more body or something like that once it's, you know, over the hoops and the petticoats and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I might do that. We'll see how it looks without it, and if it needs it, then I will add that. But for now, let's go ahead, gather this all up and see what gathering ratio I want to do. Okay, so I have part of the ruffle pinned on. Hi, Lion. Lion, I'm trying to film the skirt, not you. In any case, I have part of the ruffle pinned on. I have actually 2 whole panels pinned on. The one that you're looking at right now, that is double. So basically it is 2, really, Dora? It is 1 whole panel going into half a panel. And then over here, we've got 3/4 of a panel going into half a panel, so it's slightly less gathered. I don't think that is gathered enough. I think it's just, Lion, your tail is gonna like flash people. Thank you. I don't think it's gathered enough, so yeah, that one's not right, probably. I think this might be gathered too much. The math of doing like 3/4 of a panel in, no wait, no, not 3/4, it's already what it is. So doing 7/8 of a panel into 1 panel, I feel like that math would be really, really obnoxious. So I've decided that I should probably work on the strip fabric bit first to see what it looks like when that is over the top of those 2 panels, and see if maybe just the 2-to-1 ratio would work. So I am ripping this fabric into strips. The strips are 4¼ inches wide because I was playing around with it with my trim here, and I was trying to decide, does it look better to just have the trim over the top like that, or to fold this edge down just a little bit and stitch that to the top there. And I'm kind of thinking it's the latter, just because there's these little blue threads on here, and I feel like with another thread, sewing thread, I feel like it would just start to look really messy. I don't know, I'm still a little bit waffling on that, but basically what I'm doing is I've ripped 3 of these strips because that should be enough for the skirt, and then I'm going to have to press them because when you rip this fabric it likes to roll. So I'm going to press them, then I'm going to serge the edges, and then I will either fold it under and put this underneath, or I guess I will either maybe the second way I could just leave it straight and put this under, or I'll fold it under either way. We'll see. But yeah, let's play around with that for a minute. Dora, that's uncouth. Are you laying on my silk? You're laying on my silk. So I've put the fringe on one side of the band here just to kind of pin it in place and see what I like better between the double versus the 1.5. I think the double's gonna win. Hi, Dora. The double just seems, I don't know, nicer. I think I like that scale better. Like the 1.5 is not bad, and honestly probably the 1.75 would be correct, but I just don't really want to attempt that math. Actually, you know what? The math really should not be that hard. I just like on my phone looked up how many panels I would need total. It's 5.25 panels, and once I put those extra panels on, it should be that all I have to do is like divide each section kind of into fourths or eighths or whatever works best, match up the points, and then put it together. So yeah, I think since neither of them are quite what I want, I think I'm gonna go with the 1.75 to 1 ratio and make that extra panel and gather it all up and put all of that on the dress, and also put the other side of the fringy trim on the band, and then I'll figure out how the band actually goes onto the skirt. The ruffle is now on, attached to the skirt, and I have also done the fringy trim on both sides of this. So hopefully tomorrow I can get this attached to the skirt. Basically, it's going to just cover this seam and go, so the bottom of the little band thing is hitting like about here, and then the top is more like here. And so that is just going to get applied by machine. I think I'm honestly just going to try and stitch right on top of those stitches right there and stitch that on top and bottom, most likely top and bottom, because I think if I just did top, it would probably try to flip. And yeah, so hopefully I can do that tomorrow and maybe even get to the hem. I haven't decided yet if this will be a machine hem or a hand hem. Honestly, I'll probably take the time and do it by hand since it is silk. So very slight change of pace from what I said just moments ago to you, which was yesterday for me, is that I want some hand sewing to do later today. We're having a girls' night, and of course, what do you do at a girls' night? You hand sew, right? Just in case I do want to be doing some hand sewing, I want something to do. The hem, I don't think I'm going to be able to get there by then because I want to put the band on the skirt before I do the hem, and then of course I mark the hem, all that sort of stuff. So instead, what I'm going to do is switch to a little bit of bodice work, and I was looking at the bodice laying on the skirt now that the skirt is on the form, and that tail looks like it's a really good shape. So I'm just gonna go ahead and bind it. But of course, this is the 1850s. You can't just like bind something with bias tape. Like, that's not a thing. You have to bind it with piping. So I've got to make some piping. So to make piping, you just need to cut your fabric on the bias, so diagonal. And I like to cut mine, now I'm trying to remember since I didn't look this up first. Basically, you want to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side. So you need a 1/2 inch there. And then I think it's 3/8 inch that it takes to actually get around the piping. I'm going to double check that, but I just use yarn for my piping. Like, that's all I do is the cord in the piping. It means that it's really easy to find. I like to use a slightly chunkier yarn, not like thick and textured, but not the thinnest either, even though mid-century they did tend to really like very thin piping, but I just feel like you can't see it. So I like a little bit thicker of a piping, and I think it takes 3/8 inch to get around that piping. So I'm going to cut my strips 1 3/8 inch wide after measuring it, of course, to make sure that's correct. And I'm going to go ahead and make some piping. I have shown you how to make piping before, but it's been a while, so I'll try to show you a little clip of how you feed it through the machine as well. So I've cut several strips of bias here because this is going to go around the hem of the bodice, the arm size, and the neckline. And now what I'm doing to piece them together is you want to make a 90-degree angle here and find, I usually do like a 3/8 inch hem, but find where that 3/8 inch hem is, pin that in place, stitch basically that diagonal line right there, and then press those all open so that you have one long strip of bias. So now that the seams are all pressed, we're going to go ahead and put the piping foot on the machine. This is a piping foot. It has a groove in the bottom so that the piping can pass through it nicely. This is the yarn that I use for piping, so you can see it's kind of thick, but not too much. And you are going to put that in the center here and fold your fabric over. I find that it is usually good to put a pin in just to begin with, but I do not pin the rest of it. Then you're just going to feed that under here. You got to move your needle over. So I usually put my needle on about a 5 width, sometimes a 5.5 width. I like to drop it down and see where it's going to hit. Yeah, I want to go more over actually. I want to do a 6 width. And then you just start sewing. And you just make sure that your cord is nice and centered and that your edges meet. Take the additional step of serging the edges of the piping because I don't want any raw edges inside my bodice, and you don't have to do that. You could just like whip stitch it really carefully once you sew it down, but I prefer to serge it. And also you can get feet for your serger that will do like all of this at once. It'll just give you a serged edge and make your piping for you. I don't have any of those feet, unfortunately. So as I was putting the piping on, which is still just done with the piping foot, I remembered that this pattern also seems to be lacking any instructions about doing a facing on the underside, the left side that gets lapped over by the right side when doing hooks and eyes at least. So my hooks and eyes, they're hooks and bars really, they're gonna come to here and then that'll get hidden by all those bows and everything down the bodice. But usually when you do that, you have an extra strink layer that will finish off this front edge that's inside and come back around to the other side and give you something more to put like those bars on and just finish things off. So I have this random strip. It is actually the opposite way of the grain. This is the horizontal of the grain, but you know what? It's, you know, it'll work. It's just a facing. And so I am going to cut this curve in and make this a little facing and then put them right sides together, turn it to the inside and stitch that down when I stitch the piping down. The piping is now all on, even the little corners there at the front edges, and then everything has been stitched down with whip stitches on the inside, including the facings on both sides here and all of the hem. The only thing I haven't done yet was I ran out of time before girls' night to put the piping around the neckline, but that's going to get piped as well, even though it's going to be covered by a collar and no one's going to see it, but they did seem to pipe their necklines, so I'm going to pipe it instead of bind it and then stitch that down as well. So that will be next on the bodice. I also put the purple band on the skirt. So you can see right here how the machine stitching is just done on there. Basically, I just butted it up to where the gathering is right here on this edge, stitched that down, and then held it in place and stitched this down. I think it looks really, really nice. I love the look of it there. I now can't get far enough away to show you the full length, but that's where we are at currently. So I decided with the edges, instead of like trying to seam them together at the right length, I actually just folded them down, and then I did one of those stitches, and I don't know the name of it, where you basically go through the edge of the crease on each side, going back and forth like that, but like through the actual edge of the crease to butt them up against each other, and I did that by hand. So I'm going to try to get as much of this in the frame as possible. It's not going to be entirely possible, but I just wanted to show you that the skirt just needs the hem now and hooks and eyes at the waist, and the bodice has all of its edges finished, so I put piping up here. There's piping on the arm's eye ready for the sleeves to be put in, piping down here that I already showed you, and I just need closures here and then obviously sleeves and all of the decorations and everything like that. So what I'm going to do now, between now and the next video that you see on this project, is I'm going to do the closures and I'm going to do the hem of the skirt, which I have decided to do by hand. So it is going to take me some time. So right now I'm gonna go and mark the hem and everything, and then I'm going to slowly hand sew it over the next week. And that is because next week I'm actually going to be stepping away from this project for a little break while I do all of that hand sewing. And next week I am going to be making a gunny sacks dress. I bought some fall fabric a little while ago, and I'm going to be making that fall gunny sacks dress that I've talked about in a couple of other videos. So I'm very, very excited for that. Our weather hasn't made it to the point where I can wear it yet, but maybe by the end of next week it will. Keep your fingers crossed that I actually get some fall weather here in Washington State. So this is a little pause on this project for now, and this one will be back in 2 weeks. I do hope that you have liked this so far and that you are excited to see the final version of this. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week, with my sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and other costuming content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks right here on YouTube. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Sharon and Mirage. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!